Hey there internet, it's Phil, and today I want to talk to you about the game Overwatch. Now I really love Overwatch, which is kind of weird because competitive FPS is really not my genre. But Overwatch has really drawn me in, and ever since the first time I played it, I've been hooked. So although Overwatch is a competitive FPS, it also puts a lot of emphasis on world building and story, but most of it's not actually in the game. And it's really interesting, but something kind of weird happens when you talk about it. A lot of times when I'm playing with friends and there's an interaction between characters or some strange detail on a map that they notice, I'll mention the lore behind it, and almost all the time what I get is, where did you find that out? If you're just playing the game Overwatch, you're not going to come across almost any of the story. Most of it is told outside of the game in things like comics, short movies, and character bios. And while they do link the new stuff in the launcher when it comes out, most people aren't actually going to sit there and read what's on the launcher, they just hit play. So a really large number of players don't even know about this expansive world and story, which you can imagine as a lore nerd makes me super sad. But it really got me thinking about the way that the Overwatch game interacts with the story, in that it kind of doesn't. Nothing in the actual game loop of Overwatch reinforces any of the story stuff that they're doing outside of it. And of course, it has to be said, a multiplayer shooter is not the place for lengthy dialogue and cutscenes. It would absolutely destroy the gameplay loop if before every match you had to watch 10 minutes of people talking. But it feels like there's this really big imbalance there. So the game actually does do some storytelling, mostly through voice lines and maps. Characters in Overwatch are always chatting with each other, be it before matches or during the matches themselves. And a lot of what they say reveals details about how characters see each other or their histories. If you want some really good examples, I'm gonna link you to Hammy's channel. He does really good in-depth videos about all sorts of Overwatch lore, but my favorite ones are the ones where he goes through the voice interactions and kind of explains what they mean. There's also a ton of detail put into the maps that show the state of the world. For example, in King's Row, there's a ton of graffiti that shows you how the people of that city relate to the Omnics, robots like Zenyatta and Bastion. It's something you won't notice a lot of the time because you're, being shot or whatever, but it's some really nice detail work, and if you have time, I suggest going through the maps and just looking at all the stuff that you can find. But that's it for the story in the game. There's no place you can go to learn more about the lore, and there's no story in the actual battles. So mechanically, Overwatch is based around being able to select a bunch of different characters for their roles, and the ability to switch them out in the middle of a match if you want to change your strategy. So for the balance to be maintained, you have to be able to select any of the characters. None of them are copies of each other, they all have their own unique style. And this is, for me, one of the things that makes Overwatch so fun, but it's also where the story kind of crumbles. So in the actual story of Overwatch, we have a bunch of different groups that the characters come from. Just as an example, one of my friends was incredibly surprised when I told him that most of the characters aren't actually in Overwatch. And in fact, Overwatch itself was disbanded. It was only called back by Winston in his short. So some of the characters were in Overwatch before, some of them are in Talon, which is against Overwatch, some of them are kind of unaffiliated, but in the matches they're all fighting with and against each other kind of at random. Now this is addressed in game somewhat. For example, if you have Widowmaker and Tracer on the same team, they'll often talk about how they don't want to work together. But in terms of the context of the match, it doesn't really have any meaning. So what the devs have said about this is basically that the matches in Overwatch should be viewed as kind of non-canon what-if scenarios. Something has happened to make these characters fight these characters, and it's not really directly related to the story at all. And for the most part, I think that explanation is fine. Most people that are playing the game don't need a reason to be fighting the other team, they just want to fight. And in any other multiplayer shooter, I would say that's the end of it. But the thing about Overwatch is they really emphasize the story and the world building. Most of the advertising and hyping up of the game revolves around the story. And I really love the comics and the shorts of Overwatch, but it doesn't feel like they have a real place in the game.
Look, the people decided they were better off without us. They even called us criminals. They tore our family apart. But look around! Someone has to do something! We have to do something! We can make a difference again. The world needs us now, more than ever. Are you with me?
The story of Overwatch is actually really good. It's really interesting, there's a lot going on, and it doesn't feel like it facilitates the gameplay at all. So as we said, you have these groups that are in opposition to each other that are now fighting on the same side for no real reason. Mechanically, if you need to be able to select any character, having them be from different groups without a reason for them to be fighting together just creates this dissonance between the game and the story. As a counterexample, let's look at something like Star Wars Battlefront. In that series, there is a very definite conflict between the Rebels and the Empire. You know why you're fighting, you know what's at stake, and I think the added context makes the fight feel more meaningful, even if in the moment all you're really thinking of is fighting the enemy. So for me, it's really frustrating that Overwatch has all these building blocks of a really awesome conflict and then doesn't really use them. So the maps of Overwatch are all really cool and they all have their own flavor, but mechanically they're all exactly the same. You're either taking over points or escorting a payload, and there's never any reason given for why. And again, I'm not saying that there needs to be a cutscene, but if you swapped out one map skin for the other one, there wouldn't really be any difference. Right now, characters are waiting around or setting up their defenses at the beginning of every match. You could easily have some exposition over the radio or something just to give some context over what the fight is about. The conflict in Dorado shouldn't be the exact same one that's in Hanamura. In the Numbani map, the payload that you're escorting is the Doomfist, the item that was fought over in the original Overwatch trailer. That seems like it should be really important, but in the context of the game, there's no real explanation for what's going on. In general, I think that the map should be a little more unique. Even if you kept the map objectives basically the same, but just gave them some flavor that reflected the place where you're fighting, it would go a long way towards making the fight feel more real. I think it'd be nice if they added some unique events to maps that reflected what's going on there. And of course, you could take all this out for competitive and keep it pure, no items, Fox only, Final Destination. It just feels like one part of Overwatch wants you to be really invested in these people and what's going on with them, and the other part says that doesn't really matter. And I think if they were to work together just a little bit more, they could make something really special. And I understand that they want the game to be mechanically sound and for the story to be really good, but I feel like they're just not working together at all. And again, a lot of people that play this type of game just aren't going to care, but I'm a lore nerd, and that's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. And of course, the reason I care at all is because I love Overwatch as much as I do. But as someone who is drawn in by the story and then stayed for the gameplay, I just feel like there's something missing. I know the devs have said that they may do some sort of cooperative campaign mode. I would love that so much. Blizzard, please give me a co-op campaign. It'd be so fun. And in the end, I'm not expecting Overwatch to change, and I don't think it necessarily needs to. It's just something that I've been thinking about, and I think it's kind of an interesting interaction between game and story that we haven't necessarily seen before. So I would love to hear what you think about the story of Overwatch and the gameplay and how they intermingle. Maybe you would also like to see a little more story integrated into the gameplay. Maybe you think that sounds super boring and you just want to shoot people. Either way is totally cool. If you have any other comments, counterpoints, or things you'd like to add, please leave them below. Hit the old like button if you enjoyed the video. You can hit subscribe to get more videos. And let me know if you want me to do like an Overwatch lore series. I can kind of talk about some of the stuff that isn't in the game now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.